Why was everyone laughing except her? The sound of boots, clanging lockers, and sharp bursts of laughter filled the women's locker room at Forward Operating Base Paragan. The air was thick with the smell of damp nylon, gun oil, and exhaustion, an atmosphere born of cold altitudes and long, sleepless weeks. It was a place that belonged to warriors. Or so they thought. Captain Eva Rostova slammed her locker door shut with the kind of force that came from pride disguised as fatigue. 2 weeks in the mountains had left every muscle screaming, but she wore the pain like a medal. Her operators, Sergeant Kaido Tanaka and Corporal Leo Martinez, were already stripped down to their base layers, swapping jokes that didn't need to be funny to draw laughter. They were young, sculpted, the kind of men who carried themselves like gravity bent slightly around them. Then the door hissed open. Cold mountain air sliced into the room, carrying with it the faint sting of frost. A woman stepped in, older, mid-50s perhaps, her hair pulled back in a strict gray-streaked bun. Her fatigues were plain. No insignia, no unit patch, just standard-issue cloth that said non-combatant. She carried a single black duffel bag and moved with the quiet efficiency of someone who didn't need to prove where she belonged. Rostova's eyes followed her, the instinctive assessment of a soldier parsing threat from detail. Civilian contractor, maybe logistics, but this was their sanctuary. And strangers didn't belong here. Martinez caught her glance and smirked. "Lost, ma'am," he said, flexing his arm and admiring himself in a taped-up metal mirror. "Locker rooms for the operators. Admin folks are down the hall." The woman didn't even look at him. She set her duffel on an empty bench at the far end, unzipped it, and began arranging her things, neat, deliberate, almost ritualistic. "I don't believe so, Corporal." Her voice was low, gravelly, but calm, the kind of tone that didn't need volume to command attention. The correct use of his rank made Martinez blink. For a moment, his grin faltered. Tanaka chuckled, tossing a towel over his shoulder. "You must be the new supply liaison," he said, trying to fill the silence she left behind. "Heard they're sending someone up to clean Thorne's inventory mess. Good luck with that. The man thinks FIFO is a combat formation." "I'll keep that in mind, Sergeant," she said. Still, she didn't look at him. Rostova folded her arms, her voice clipped, cold. "Ma'am, this area's for field operators only. You might be more comfortable in admin. They have heated floors." It wasn't a suggestion. It was a dismissal. The kind officers used when they didn't want to say you don't belong here. Finally, the woman turned. Her eyes were pale gray, washed out like the color of mountain skis before a storm. There was no resentment in them, no defiance, just an unsettling calm, as though she saw through them, measured them, and found them unremarkable. "This locker was assigned to me," she said simply. "It will suffice." Then she turned away again. That was it. No apology, no argument, just the quiet finality of someone who didn't need permission. It was the worst insult she could have given them: indifference. Tanaka rolled his eyes. Martinez muttered something about paper pushers. Rostova, for all her authority, said nothing more, but the tension lingered like a scent that wouldn't wash off. Within an hour, the new arrival had a nickname. "The Archivist." A whisper first, then a joke. It stuck. In the days that followed, the base treated her like furniture. She was seen in the mess hall, eating alone. Always the same seat, back to the wall, utensils placed at precise angles. When she walked past, conversations dropped to murmurs just loud enough to sting. "Careful," Martinez would whisper to Tanaka, loud enough for her to hear. "Don't forget your receipts, archivists watching." She never responded. Not once. She moved through Paragan like a shadow, too quiet, too still. In the gym, while others grunted through heavy lifts, she stretched, balanced, moved like water through forms no one recognized. Not weakness, not yoga, something older, controlled, rhythmic. Rostova saw it once and scoffed under her breath. "Old bones keeping the joints warm," she said. but she watched longer than she meant to. The woman's breathing never broke. Her balance never wavered. She wasn't training her body. She was maintaining precision. No one understood that kind of discipline anymore. They thought her silence meant fear. They mistook grace for fragility. Colonel Marcus Thorne, the base commander, ran Paragan the way a bureaucrat runs a factory. His uniform was always perfect, his desk spotless, his meetings full of slides and acronyms. When his XO told him the liaison from CENTCOM had arrived, he sighed dramatically. "Another clipboard with legs," he muttered. He expected a sharp-eyed major or an overeager lieutenant colonel. What he got was her, the gray-haired woman in plain fatigues. She didn't salute. She didn't sit. She simply stood there, hands clasped behind her back. "Welcome to Paragan," Thorne said, putting on his most diplomatic smile. "Hope the trip up wasn't too rough." "It was manageable, Colonel." Her name, according to the manifest, was Sharma. No first name, no rank. Just Sharma, contractor. That made sense, right? A paper checker and auditor. "I've had an office cleared for you down by records," Thorne said, waving her off. "You'll find our documentation in order. We run a tight ship here." "I'm sure you do," she said quietly. "I'll need a terminal with access to the TACnet and a hard line to the Joint Ops Center." Thorne blinked. "You will." It was an odd request for a logistics liaison, but he waved it away. "Fine, just stay out of the way. We've got missions running hot. My people don't have time for paperwork theater." She nodded once, no offense taken. Of course. That was the last most of them heard from her. For 2 days, Sharma became a ghost. But not the kind that haunted. The kind that watched. Then came the storm. It hit at 300, a white wall of shrieking wind and blinding snow that swallowed the mountain whole. Inside the Joint Operations Center, tension hung thicker than the static crackling over the comms. On the main display, a red blinking icon labeled Ghost 7 pulsed like a heartbeat deep inside enemy territory. "What's their status?" Thorne demanded. "Last transmission 12 minutes ago," a young comms tech stammered. "Ambushed near K2 Ridge. They're under heavy contact. Primary channels dead. This feed from Sergeant Bowles' personal beacon, but it's fatting fast." Static hissed and broke. Then a voice, ragged, terrified, cut through the noise. "Under fire, K2 Ridge. Extraction impossible, storm." Then silence. "Get me a weather update," Thorne barked. "Whiteout, sir," came the reply. "Nothing flies in this. Not the helos, not the drones. Grounded for 8 hours minimum." 8 hours? Ghost 7 wouldn't survive 8 minutes. Captain Rostova and her team stood near the command floor, already in cold weather gear, waiting for orders. The storm raged outside, but their instincts screamed to move. "Sir," Rostova said, stepping forward, "we can go. Give us a route." Thorne hesitated. His eyes darted between screens, between risk and protocol. Every instinct told him to wait. Procedure said, hold position, assess, report. But that meant letting 4 men die in the dark. "Negative," he said finally. "We don't have intel on enemy numbers or Ghost 7's exact position. Sending you blind is suicide." "Sitting here's a death sentence for them," Martinez snapped. "Stand down, Corporal." The command floor erupted in chaos. Officers shouting over one another, radios squawking. No one had an answer. The storm outside howled like something alive, and inside, a different kind of storm was building, fear disguised as protocol. And through it all, she stood silent. Sharma was in the back near the secondary comm station, eyes fixed not on the screens but on the people, watching, listening, processing. Then quietly she stepped forward. Her boots made no sound on the tile. No one noticed until she was beside the colonel. "Replay the last 30 seconds, she said. "Filter out high-frequency static. Amplify the low end." "What?" Thorne frowned. We already. Do it. He waved, irritated. The tech obeyed. The room fell still. The recording played again, stripped of interference this time. Beneath the gunfire and panic, a faint echo pulsed, a deep, hollow rhythm. Thum, thum, thum. Like the breath of the mountain itself. What is that? Rostova asked. Artillery. No, Sharma said softly. Wind. They stared at her. Wind moving through sandstone columns. The locals call them the devil's pipe organ. You only hear that sound when the wind's from the northwest, like tonight. Ghost 7 isn't on K2 Ridge. They've been pushed south into the gorge below the Zermer spires, their beacons bouncing off canyon walls. Thorne froze, eyes wide. That's 10 kilometers off their signal. Impossible. Your systems are reading ghosts, she interrupted. I'm listening to the terrain. She moved past him, pulling open a storage cabinet. Inside, she found something ancient, a rolled-up Soviet topographical map. She spread it across a console, tracing lines with a steady finger. They'll expect a relief force through this valley, she murmured. Natural choke point, certain death. Then her finger drifted higher. Here, an old herder's path, not on your digital maps. Narrow, dangerous, but it bypasses the valley and drops directly above the gorge. If you move now, you can reach Overwatch before sunrise. She looked up not at Thorne, but at Rostova. The storm that grounds your air support is also your cover, she said. Move fast, carry light. You'll have 4 hours before the wind shifts. After that, you'll be exposed. Silence. The kind that hums in your bones. Every eye in the room turned toward her, toward the woman they dismissed as a clerk. She wasn't suggesting a plan. She was commanding one. Thorne sputtered, pride rearing up like a dying flame. You're a civilian. You don't give orders here. Sharma's gaze didn't flinch. She didn't argue. She just turned. Walked away. Toward the lockers at the back of the JOC. The sound of her steps echoed, measured, final. Rostova watched her. Tanaka, Martinez, everyone did. There was a strange weight to the moment, like the air itself was holding its breath. Sharma reached her locker, spun the dial and opened it. Inside, the same plain gray towel, the same simple duffel. She pulled it out, unzipped it. And the room froze. Because what she drew out was not a folder or a map, but a dark green uniform jacket, folded with reverent precision. She shook it out, the fabric catching the fluorescent light. On the shoulders, 4 polished silver stars. The archivist was gone, and in her place stood General Anna Sharma. For a moment, no one breathed. The room, a space once filled with chatter, authority, and noise, went silent. The hum of monitors, the wind outside, even the steady beep of the communications console seemed to fade beneath the quiet gravity of what stood before them. The woman they had mocked, dismissed, ignored, now stood in full uniform. 4 stars on her shoulders. A nameplate, SHAR. And beneath it, a row of ribbons so long and heavy with history, it seemed the fabric itself struggled to bear their weight. General Anna Sharma. The name struck Rostova like a memory from another lifetime, one whispered at the academy, half legend, half myth, a ghost of wars fought long before her time. The wraith of Zermer, the strategist who'd pulled 3 battalions from encirclement without losing a single man, the architect of Operation Nightfall, a commander who disappeared years ago, into rumor, into history. And here she was, standing under flickering fluorescent light, in a mountain base locker room that suddenly felt far too small for what she represented. Colonel Thorne's face went pale. His mouth opened, then closed again, words lost in the tide of disbelief. The same man who told her to stay out of the way now looked like he might sink through the floor. Rostova couldn't move. Her muscles wanted to lock into salute, but something inside her, pride, guilt, awe, froze her in place. Sharma's expression didn't change. Her voice was steady, unraised. "You asked who I am, Colonel." Each word landed like a stone, dropped in still water. "I am the officer who wrote the doctrine on high-altitude winter warfare in this region. I authorized the establishment of this base 20 years ago, and for the next 7 hours," she paused, eyes locked on Thorne, "I am the supreme commander of this operation." Her voice cut through him like a scalpel. "You are relieved of command for the duration of this crisis. You will stand down and you will not interfere." There was no anger in her tone, only certainty. The kind that comes from a lifetime of command. Thorne nodded before his brain could catch up, instinct overtaking ego. His legs seemed to give way, and he stumbled a step back, half sitting against the console. The man who had ruled this base through procedure and fear now looked small. Sharma turned her gaze to Rostova. "Captain," she said. Her voice carried a weight Rostova could feel in her chest. "You have your route and your objective. My plan is not a suggestion. You move within the hour. Silence, speed, discipline, that is your armor now." Rostova's throat tightened. "Yes, General." Her voice cracked, stripped of arrogance, raw with understanding. "Your signal for engagement," Sharma continued, "will be a single transmission. One word, midnight. Ghost 7 will recognize it. They will know it's me." Rostova nodded sharply, understood. Sharma gave a curt nod. "Then move. You're wasting daylight you don't have." That was all it took. The moment the words left her mouth, everything inside Rostova snapped into motion. "Tanaka Martinez, gear up," she barked, her voice steady again but different. Not defiant, not cocky. Focused, sharpened. They moved like soldiers who had just remembered what the word meant. In minutes they were gone, pushing through the blizzard that howled outside. And in the sudden quiet that followed, General Sharma turned back toward the map. Her reflection caught in the hollow display, a ghost wrapped in stars, steady, unflinching, alone. Hours passed. The storm raged on, shaking the thin metal walls of Fob Paragan. But inside the JOC, order had returned not from fear, not from rank, but from purpose. Sharma didn't sit, she didn't pace. She commanded. The room that had been chaos now moved like a machine. Her voice was low, precise, never rushed. "Major Calloway, feed me live atmospheric readings. Keep your overlays current every 5 minutes. Communications, maintain passive scan. Look for microbursts, not open transmissions. She'll signal once, short range." Her hands moved across the console, cross-referencing the glowing holographic terrain with the old, creased paper map beside it, Soviet era, annotated in fatting Cyrillic. While others saw screens and data, she saw memory. She had walked these mountains once, bled in them. Her mind ran through possibilities like a chessboard she'd memorized years ago. She knew what the terrain demanded, what fear did to men in whiteouts, how arrogance killed more soldiers than bullets ever could. The storm outside screamed against the windows, but her presence inside felt like a wall against it, unyielding. Colonel Thorne sat in his office, door half open, watching her. He didn't move, didn't speak. He just sat, small and silent, as the woman he'd dismissed took control of everything he thought he understood. His XO, Major Calloway, had become her voice on the floor. A capable officer, young but sharp, now flourishing under the kind of leadership that didn't need to shout. "Thermal overlays for Grid 47 Charlie," Sharma said quietly. Calloway's fingers moved over the console. The holographic screen flickered with heat signatures distorted by the storm, mostly gray, some faint blues, nothing clear. "Nothing, General," he said. "Too much interference." "Refine the filters," she replied. "You're looking for patterns, not dots, clusters of warmth. They'll be huddled, conserving body heat. Slightly less cold, not hot." He adjusted the calibration. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, 3 faint blue blurs began to form, like ghosts in fog. There, Sharma said, her eyes didn't leave the screen. 3 positions, squad-sized, covering the gorge perfectly. Calloway nodded, awe creeping into his voice. They're exactly where you predicted. Sharma didn't acknowledge the praise. Because that's what I would do, she said softly. For the first time, Thorne saw it, the mind behind the myth. It wasn't luck. It wasn't legend. It was cold, clinical brilliance forged by decades of studying how men fought, how they died, how they survived. Time crawled. The storm outside began to shift, its fury dimming into a low moan. Dawn was still hours away, but a faint light bled through the clouds, enough to turn the snow to steel. Rostova's team should have been nearing the ridge. Sharma stood unmoving, her gaze fixed on the display as if sheer focus could keep them alive. Every few minutes she checked her watch. Not impatience, timing, rhythm. The storm had its own pulse and she was counting its heartbeats. Then suddenly, a voice. "General, I've got something," the comms tech shouted. "Burst transmission encrypted, Ghost 7's channel." "Put it on speaker," Sharma ordered. A distorted word crackled through static. One word. Midnight. For a moment, everyone in the JOC just stared. Then, as if a dam had broken, the tension drained from the room. Shoulders dropped. Someone exhaled audibly. Rostova had made it. Sharma leaned in, keyed the secure frequency, her voice calm but carrying the weight of command that reached across the storm. "Ghost 7, this is Wraith," she said. "Midnight is called, break west to rendezvous. Move now, confirm." For a few agonizing seconds, nothing. Then a voice, rough, exhausted, half disbelief, half relief. "Wraith, God, is that you? Ghost 7 copies. We're moving, thank you." The sound hit the room like sunlight. Because they all knew what that name meant. Wraith. Her old call sign, whispered in old mission logs and blacked-out reports. The myth was alive, and she had just saved their men. But it wasn't over. "Major Calloway," Sharma said, already moving to the next step. "Get me a line to the 101st Aviation Brigade at Bagram, 2 Apache and a pave low. The moment the storm clears, they launch. Target coordinates, those 3 enemy positions you flagged." "Yes, General." She wasn't waiting for victory. She was building the aftermath before the fight was even done. That was command, seeing the board 10 moves ahead. Up in the mountains, Rostova's team became shadows. They crawled along the knife-edge ridge, the storm clawing at them, snow blinding them, wind cutting like razors. Their breath froze on their lips, their gear icing over. Every step was a risk, every second a test of will. But they moved, because she had told them how. At dawn, they reached the overwatch position above the gorge. Through their scopes, they saw flashes, muzzle bursts, brief and wild. The enemy below, convinced their ambush had succeeded, kept firing into the void. Rostova whispered into her mic. "Targets acquired." The reply came in that same calm, low voice. "Engage." And the mountain erupted. Suppressors hissed, muzzle flashes flared and vanished. The storm muffled everything, turning death into whispers. Rostova's team rained precision down on the enemy positions, dismantling the ambush in minutes. Ghost 7, battered but alive, used the chaos to break free, running westward through snow and smoke. From the ridge, Rostova could see them, 4 dark figures, stumbling but moving, disappearing into the white. Then silence. The storm began to fade, the wind eased. The mountain sighed. It was over. 2 hours later, the storm broke entirely. The horizon blazed orange as the first light of dawn touched the peaks. Snow glittered like shattered glass. A low thrum grew in the distance, helicopters. 3 of them, cutting through the thawing air like vengeance. They landed on the base tarmac, rotors throwing up clouds of powdered frost. Rostova's team stepped off first, exhausted, frostbitten, bloodied. Behind them, 4 soldiers from Ghost 7 limped down the ramp, faces hollow but alive. And standing there, waiting in the cold morning light, was General Sharma. No entourage, no ceremony. Just her in her uniform jacket, hands behind her back, the storm's remnants clinging to her hair. Rostova dismissed her team and walked forward, boots crunching in the snow. 3 feet away, she stopped. For a heartbeat, neither spoke. The air between them was heavy, not with tension, but with understanding. Rostova straightened her spine. Her right hand snapped up, salute perfect, crisp, absolute. It wasn't just regulation. It was repentance. It was respect. General Sharma held her gaze, those pale gray eyes that saw everything. Then slowly, she raised her own hand and returned the salute. No words. No speeches. Just the silent exchange between 2 soldiers, one who had learned humility, and one who had never needed to raise her voice to command it. For a moment, the entire base seemed to hold its breath. And then with a small nod, Sharma lowered her hand. That was enough. The mountain was quiet again. Too quiet. The kind of silence that comes only after chaos, where sound has memory and the snow remembers what happened. Even the wind had gentled, whispering now instead of howling, as if reluctant to disturb what the storm had buried. From the top of the command tower, the view stretched endless, ridges fatting into pale mist, the sky softening from steel to blue. It was beautiful and cruel, like most things that tested men and broke them. General Anna Sharma stood at the edge, hands clasped behind her back, eyes on the horizon. She wasn't smiling. She rarely did. Victory was never a reason for that. The helicopters were gone, carrying Ghost 7 toward a rear hospital unit. Rostova's team had staggered back to their quarters, each step heavy with exhaustion and something else, reverence maybe, though none of them would ever admit it aloud. The base had returned to its rhythm, but something fundamental had shifted. The air was cleaner, voices softer, laughter rarer, but more genuine when it came. Because every person who had seen the storm's end had seen something they didn't quite understand. A quiet woman in a green jacket who had changed everything without raising her voice. Inside the JOC, the chaos of the night had been cleaned up, papers stacked, screens reset, coffee replaced. Colonel Thorne sat alone in his office, the door half closed. He looked older now, his posture deflated. On his desk lay a single folded note, the kind of professional message that didn't need many words. It simply read, "Command reinstated. Recommendation for debrief, immediate and honest. G. Sharma." There was no threat in the tone, no gloating. Just finality. He stared at it for a long time, feeling the sting of what it meant. She hadn't humiliated him. She'd simply shown him the difference between authority and leadership. And that was worse, because he'd seen the truth of it, in the way his people had turned toward her voice, not his. In the way she'd restored calm, not by command but by presence. He picked up the note again, read it a second time, then folded it carefully and slipped it into his pocket. Some lessons, he realized, arrived too late to save a career. But not too late to save a man. In the mess hall, Tanaka and Martinez sat across from each other in silence. Their food had gone cold, untouched. The bravado that had filled their days like armor was gone now, stripped away by cold, fatigue, and shame. Tanaka spoke first. "She knew our names," he said quietly. Martinez blinked. "What?" "In the JOC, when she called us by rank, she already knew who we were." He shook his head slowly. She'd been watching us, not judging, just knowing. Martinez tried to laugh, but it caught in his throat. "You think she heard the stuff we said?" Tanaka looked down at his plate. She heard everything. Silence again. This time it stayed. Outside, through the window, they saw her walking across the courtyard, alone. No aides, no escort, just that same quiet stride, the stars on her shoulders catching the pale sun. And something in both men made them stand, not from duty, not from fear, but instinct. They didn't salute. They just stood, eyes following her until she disappeared into the admin wing. Then they sat again, the weight of their own words pressing harder than the mountain air ever had. Rostova hadn't slept. Her bunk remained untouched, her gear half cleaned. The adrenaline had burned out hours ago, but the storm inside her hadn't settled. She sat alone in the small chapel built into the far corner of the base, a simple structure of wood and concrete, no priest, no altar, just a quiet place to breathe. Her gloves were still wet from the snow. Her hands trembled faintly, but not from cold. In her mind replayed every second of that mission, the way the wind screamed, the flash of muzzle fire through the white, the sound of the general's calm voice guiding them through madness. And the way she had once laughed at that same voice only days before. Pride. It was a funny thing. It made you tall until the world reminded you how small you really were. She thought of that moment in the JOC, the uniform, the stars, the quiet power that had filled the room like a storm of its own. Not noise, not anger. Just gravity. She whispered to the empty air, voice barely audible. "I'm sorry, General." The words fell flat against the stone walls, but maybe that was enough. Apologies were never for the person who heard them. They were for the one who finally understood why they were needed. That night, long after the base had quieted, the women's locker room was empty again. The hum of the vents was the only sound. Somewhere in the distance, the generator coughed, then steadied. The scent of weapon oil and soap lingered. Sharma sat on the same wooden bench where it had all begun, the same space where laughter once echoed, sharp and careless. Now it was calm, cleansed. Her uniform jacket was folded neatly beside her. On the towel before her lay a disassembled M17 pistol, slide, barrel, spring, frame, arranged like a ritual. The movements of her hands were slow, practiced, almost meditative. She ran the cleaning cloth along the barrel, the rhythm steady. It wasn't about the weapon. It never had been. It was about control, about finding stillness in the repetition of something honest. Each stroke of the cloth pulled up old memories. Iraq, Bosnia. The jungles of places that didn't exist on any map. Each scrape of the brush carried echoes of men she'd led, names she still remembered even when the metals tried to erase them. To some, the stars on her shoulders looked like honor. To her, they were weight. Every one of them made of faces and names and choices that still visited her in dreams. She paused, eyes on the small metal mirror fixed to the locker door opposite her. The reflection staring back was lined, gray, tired. A face the young soldiers had mistaken for weakness. They hadn't been wrong, not entirely. She was tired. Of command. Of loss. Of the endless repetition of proving herself in rooms that still forgot what quiet power looked like. But fatigue was not fragility. And silence was not surrender. They were armor, the kind only earned through surviving long enough to stop needing to shout. She reassembled the pistol, piece by piece, the final click of the slide locking into place, sounding louder than it should have. Then she set it down and just sat, hands resting on her knees, spine straight, eyes on nothing. Outside the small window, dawn was beginning again. The pale wash of morning light cut through the frost on the glass, painting her silhouette in silver. She thought of the young captain, of the arrogance that had burned so bright in her eyes, and of how quickly the storm had put it out. Rostova would learn. She had potential, raw, fierce, unshaped. the kind that needed humbling to harden properly. Sharma had once been her, decades ago, impatient, brilliant, sure of her own invincibility. Until war had taught her that strength isn't the absence of doubt. It's the choice to keep walking despite it. There was a faint knock on the door. Soft, hesitant. "Enter," she said, not looking up. The door creaked open, boots shuffled. Then a voice, uncertain but steady. "General, permission to speak." Sharma glanced up. Rostova stood in the doorway, still in fatigues, eyes red-rimmed, posture rigid. For the first time, Sharma saw not arrogance but humility in her stance and something like fear, not of punishment but of disappointing someone she respected. "Granted," Sharma said. Rostova stepped forward. "I wanted to thank you for saving my team, for," she hesitated, searching for words, "for not letting me make the wrong choice." Sharma's gaze held her. "You made the right one when it mattered." "I didn't believe you," Rostova admitted. "When you first arrived, I saw what I wanted to see. I thought strength had a look, a sound. I was wrong." Sharma said nothing for a moment. Then, "Most people are once." Rostova lowered her eyes. "I don't know if I deserve command after this." "Then you're finally ready for it," Sharma said softly. That silenced her. Because it wasn't comfort, it was truth. Rostova's eyes glistened. She took a breath, steadying herself. "If there's ever anything—" "There will be," Sharma interrupted gently. "There always is. But you won't owe me anything, Captain. You'll owe it to the ones who'll come after you." Rostova nodded. "Yes, ma'am." Sharma studied her for another beat, then gave the faintest hint of a nod, a gesture that, from her, was equal to a full embrace. "Get some rest," she said finally. Rostova saluted sharply. Then she left, the echo of her boots fatting down the corridor, until the room was silent again. Sharma watched the door close, then turned back to the small mirror. Her reflection stared back at her, blurred slightly by condensation. The archivist, the wraith, the general. 3 names, 1 truth. She picked up her jacket and brushed a speck of lint from one of the stars. It glinted once in the morning light. Then she hung it carefully on the hook beside the locker. There would be another storm. There always was. She took a slow breath, steady and deep, the kind of breath you take when you've made peace with your own ghosts. Then she stepped out of the locker room, the faint scent of gun oil and snow following her. And when the door closed behind her, the echo that remained wasn't laughter anymore. It was reverence. Unspoken, earned. Because sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. Morning came clear and brittle. For the first time in days, the sky above Paragan was a single sheet of pale blue, the kind of color that seems carved from ice. The storm had spent itself in the night. But its memory clung to everything: frost on antennas, frozen footprints in the courtyard, the smell of snow and gunpowder hanging in the thin air. The base stirred awake slowly. Men and women moved through corridors in silence, each carrying the same quiet thought: they were alive because of her. No announcement had been made. No speech. But the story was already moving, from the mess line to the armory, from mechanic to medic, whispered in half-sentences and unfinished thoughts. "Did you hear the new contractor? She's a general." "No, not just any general. Sharma, the Sharma. The one from Nightfall. She's still here. She's everywhere." By noon the myth had taken root again, reborn not in propaganda but in awe. And yet, if you'd walked through the compound, you wouldn't have seen a legend. You'd have seen a gray-haired woman walking between hangars with a clipboard and a thermos of coffee, stopping to speak softly with a young engineer about wind shear tolerances on the east landing pad. She moved the way she always had, quietly. But the silence around her had changed. Now it wasn't the silence of disregard. It was the silence of respect. In the motor pool, Martinez was tightening a bolt on an engine when Tanaka came over with 2 mugs of instant coffee. Neither said anything for a while. The clink of tools filled the air. Finally, Martinez muttered, "You think she'll stay?" Tanaka shrugged. "People like her don't stay, they appear, fix things, then they vanish." Martinez nodded slowly. "Yeah, like she was never here." Tanaka set down the mugs. "You ever wonder how many like her there are? People we walk past, dismiss, because they don't look the part." Martinez gave a small, bitter laugh. "Every day since that night." For a long time they just stood there, listening to the hum of generators. Something in both of them had cracked open, not broken, just opened. Like the first breath after surfacing from deep water. Captain Rostova stood in front of the tactical display in the now silent JOC. The map was empty, no blinking icons, no mission alerts. Just the topography of mountains bathed in soft light. She could still see the line Sharma had traced with her finger, that impossible ridge, the one no digital system had known existed. It was still there, faintly drawn in grease pencil. She hadn't wiped it away. Behind her, Major Calloway entered, carrying 2 folders. "General asked for your after-action report," he said quietly. Rostova took them, hesitating. "How's she doing?" "She's already planning new logistics protocols," Calloway said, half smiling. "If Thorne were smart, he'd stay out of her way." Rostova smirked faintly, then grew serious. "She shouldn't have had to prove anything to us." Calloway looked at her, then at the map. "That's not why she did it." He tapped the pencil line on the ridge. "She did it because someone had to, and she still believes someone always should." He left her with that thought. She stood there for a long time, eyes on the map, realizing that leadership wasn't about rank. It was about responsibility willingly carried, even when no one asked you to. That evening, the wind returned, softer this time, curling around the corners of the base like a lullaby. Lights flickered in the barracks windows. Somewhere a radio played a low, bluesy guitar. The storm was gone, but its rhythm lingered in the heartbeat of the place. General Sharma sat alone in her temporary office, the same one Thorne had assigned her near the records room. A single lamp burned beside her. Its light fell on a spread of documents, incident reports, terrain surveys, personnel evaluations. But she wasn't reading, not really. Her gaze was distant, unfocused, fixed on the window where frost traced delicate veins across the glass. Beyond it the mountains loomed, ancient and indifferent. She spent a lifetime in places like this. Distant outposts, forward lines, places where civilization thinned and the truth of a person revealed itself. There were medals in her service record that she couldn't remember receiving. Commendations that had never made her feel proud. But there were also names, too many of them, that she could still say in the dark without needing to read them. That was the real ledger of command. Lives carried, debts unpaid. A knock broke her thoughts. "Enter." Colonel Thorne stepped in. No folder, no pretense of authority. Just a man in uniform who looked as though the weight of silence had grown too heavy to bear. "General," he said, voice low, "I came to thank you." She looked up slowly. "You don't owe me thanks, Colonel. You owe your people clarity." He nodded. "I've already filed the report. It names my failures. It won't fix them, but it's a start." Sharma studied him for a long moment. Then she gestured toward the chair across from her. "Sit." He did. "You made the same mistake most leaders make," she said quietly. "You thought command was about control." Thorne met her eyes, "And it is." "It's about trust," she said. "Control is fear wearing a uniform. Trust is discipline wearing courage." He took that in, the words sinking deep. "You still believe this place can work." "I wouldn't be here if I didn't." For a moment they sat in shared silence. Then she leaned back, gaze softening. "You'll recover, Colonel, But don't chase redemption, just earn reliability. He nodded slowly, and for the first time since the storm began, there was something human in his face, not pride, not shame, just humility. He stood, saluted, and left without another word. When the door closed, Sharma exhaled a quiet, almost weary breath. Teaching always cost more than doing. But if the lesson held, it was worth the price. 2 days later, the helicopters returned, this time carrying supplies instead of survivors. By then, Sharma had already signed the transfer orders. Her name wasn't on any manifest. No fanfare, no announcement. She simply prepared to leave the way she had arrived, unremarkably. Rostova found her on the airfield at dawn, standing beside a transport with a small canvas bag slung over her shoulder. "You're leaving," Rostova said. Sharma nodded. "My work here is done." "Where will you go?" "Wherever I'm needed," Sharma replied, her eyes on the mountains. "There's always another ridge, another storm." Rostova hesitated. "I wish I'd known who you were from the start." Sharma turned to her, a faint smile in the corner of her mouth. "You did, you just didn't recognize it." "What do you mean?" "The woman you mocked," Sharma said softly. "The one who stayed silent, that was me. But it's also every soldier who endures without applause. The rank only made you see what you should have already respected." Rostova swallowed hard. "I won't forget that." "I hope not," Sharma said. "Someday you'll have your own archivist. Someone everyone underestimates. Remember what silence might be hiding." Rostova nodded, fighting the tightness in her throat. "Permission to walk you to the bird." "Denied," Sharma said gently. "This isn't a farewell, it's a continuation." Rostova smiled faintly. "Yes, ma'am." Sharma extended her hand. Rostova shook it, firm, steady, equal. Then Sharma turned and walked toward the waiting aircraft. The rotors began to spin, snow whipping around her in spirals. Her figure blurred, shrinking in the glare of sunrise until she was just a shape in motion, a lone shadow crossing the white. Then the transport lifted off, banking east toward the rising light, and she was gone. By noon, her name had already been stenciled on the duty roster as departed. Her locker was empty. Only a faint trace of gun oil scent lingered. But on the bench she'd once used, someone had left a folded towel, and beside it, a single phrase scratched into the metal with a key. "Strength is quiet." No one claimed to have written it. No one tried to erase it. Weeks later, new recruits would arrive. They'd hear whispers of the storm, the rescue, the mysterious woman who'd appeared and vanished. They'd laugh, disbelieving. And the veterans of that night would smile small, knowing smiles that said, "You'll learn." Because stories like hers didn't end. They traveled. They became part of the air, part of the way people carried themselves. Every mission briefing from that day forward began with a phrase Rostova introduced. "Listen before you lead." No one questioned where it came from. They just nodded, unconsciously straightening their posture, as if somewhere far away a gray-haired general was still watching. That night, under a sky so clear the stars looked close enough to touch, Captain Rostova stood outside alone. The cold bit at her fingers, but she didn't move. Somewhere out there, beyond those peaks, Sharma was already walking through another storm. And somehow, that made the world feel steadier. She looked up, whispered into the wind. "Thank you." The breeze answered softly, curling past her ear like an old friend. Not with words, just presence. And she smiled because she understood now. The greatest leaders didn't leave echoes. They left silence sturdy enough for others to stand on. The transport droned east for hours, carving through bands of thin cloud. Inside, the cabin was quiet. No chatter, no headset banter, only the rhythmic tremor of the engines and the hollow pulse of altitude. General Anna Sharma sat near the rear, strapped in beside a window dusted with frost. Her duffel bag rested at her boots, the same black one she'd carried into Paragan, now lighter by a few reports and one worn towel left behind. Outside, dawn crawled higher, turning the peaks below into golden knives cutting through shadow. From up here, the war looked peaceful. Everything always did at distance. She reached into her breast pocket and drew out a small, weathered notebook. Its cover was frayed, its pages half filled with writing so compact it looked like code. She didn't keep a diary, she kept lessons, fragments, observations written to herself so she wouldn't forget. She opened it to the last entry and wrote, "Silence is not weakness, it is readiness. Noise is for the uncertain." She paused, tapping the pencil against the page. Then added, "Paragan survived, Rostova learned. Perhaps that's enough." The pilot's voice broke over the intercom, low and distorted. "Touching down at Bagram in 10. Welcome back to the world, ma'am." Sharma closed the notebook and looked out the window again. The world. That was generous. The world she lived in was still mostly shadows and cold rooms filled with maps. Bagram Airfield, a place that had seen too many wars and too many commanders. But even here, news traveled fast. When she stepped onto the tarmac, the airmen and soldiers who noticed her didn't need introductions. They recognized the silhouette, the posture, the understated confidence, the silver constellation on her shoulders. And the whispers began. "That's her. You sure?" Saw the report from Paragan myself. She took command during a whiteout, brought them back. "I thought she retired years ago." Legends don't retire, they just change coordinates. She ignored it. She learned long ago that the louder the myth grew, the quieter she had to remain. The truth was simpler and lonelier. Inside the operations center, General Ross waited for her. Younger, polished, built for press briefings. He extended a hand, smile already rehearsed. "Welcome back to civilization, ma'am." Heard Paragan was eventful. Sharma shook his hand, her expression unreadable. It was necessary. Ross chuckled nervously. "That's one word for it. You made Thorne a ghost in his own command. Half the network's still talking about it. You realize you've got officers calling your playbook gospel." She glanced at him, tone even. "Then tell them to stop worshiping and start learning. Doctrine doesn't save lives, people do." Ross's smile faltered, he nodded. "Yes, ma'am, I'll remember that." She didn't stay for the debriefing. Her next assignment awaited, a classified advisory post at a remote training division in the northern desert. Another forgotten corner, another storm waiting to be mapped. Weeks passed. The desert heat replaced the mountain cold. The faces changed, new recruits, new arrogance, new lessons waiting to be learned the hard way. Sharma's presence, there was an anomaly. The trainees whispered about her, too. An old general who moved like she was still on mission, who ate alone, who never raised her voice but whose words stayed lodged in your chest long after she left the room. Every morning she walked the perimeter before dawn. No escort, no display. Just a ritual of movement, of listening to the silence before the day's noise began. The base commander, Brigadier Hensley, a blunt man with sunburned cheeks, once tried to shadow her on those walks. After 2 kilometers, he was winded. She turned to him with that same calm expression and said, "Sir, command is endurance before its authority." He didn't follow her again, but he started waking earlier. In the barracks, her name had become shorthand for something unspoken. When a young lieutenant rushed a report or barked orders too loudly, a senior NCO would murmur, "You're talking louder than General Sharma walks." And that was enough to shut him down. Rostova's phrase, "Listen before you lead," had made its way there too, passed along like an heirloom. They didn't know where it came from. But Sharma did. She carried it like a quiet proof that her time in Paragan had mattered. Late one night, she sat outside her quarters, the desert wind warm against her face. Stars spread across the sky like frost. In her hands was a small data slate, reports from across commands, including one labeled RUSTOVA, EVA Field Promotion Major. She smiled faintly. No ceremony, no letter, just the entry. But that was enough. She scrolled through the attached file, a new photo of Rostova at a briefing table, posture firm, eyes steady. The arrogance was gone. In its place, composure. Responsibility. At the bottom of the report, a handwritten note scanned into the record caught her eye. To whoever reads this, leadership was taught to me by someone who didn't need to speak to be obeyed. ER. Sharma closed the slate. For the first time in a long while, she let herself feel something like warmth, not pride exactly. Relief maybe. The kind that came from knowing a seed you'd planted had survived the storm. But the peace didn't last. It never did. One morning, her aide, a nervous second lieutenant named Patel, found her outside the hangar, reading a message on her secured device. He'd seen that expression before, the one that meant she was already elsewhere, halfway into another mission. "General," he asked carefully. She didn't look up. "We've got an incident. Border patrol team ambushed north of the river line. 4 missing. Command wants my assessment." Patel hesitated. "Ma'am, you're not officially on that chain." She glanced at him. "No one ever is until they are." He didn't ask again. Within hours, she was airborne in a recon chopper, wind tearing at her uniform sleeves. The desert blurred beneath her, endless, shifting, full of secrets. The ambush site was chaos, burned vehicles half buried in sand, shell casings glittering in the morning light. Sharma knelt beside one of the armored trucks, fingertips brushing over the shattered comms array. "Wrong frequency," she murmured. "They were jamming them locally." The captain in charge, young, anxious, stood behind her. "We had drones overhead, ma'am. They didn't see a thing." "Because you were looking for movement," she said. "You should have been listening for silence." He frowned. "Silence." She pointed to the canyon wall. "Echoes tell you what eyes can't. The wind here hums north to south. When it stops, something's blocking it." He blinked, realizing. They'd been ambushed from the dead zone of the wind. She stood, brushing the dust from her knees. "Pull your perimeter back 2 clicks. The missing aren't dead. They're being held. You'll find a cave mouth east of here, small. You'll hear it before you see it." He hesitated. "You're certain?" "No," she said, stepping past him toward the helicopter. "But I'm right." 3 hours later, they found the cave. And inside, the 4 missing soldiers, dehydrated but alive. The captain never forgot that. He told the story to everyone who would listen. And just like that, the legend grew again, carried on the wind. Weeks passed. Then months. The war kept changing names and coordinates, but the rhythm stayed the same. Storms and silences, arrogance and reckoning. General Sharma became a phantom between commands. Some said she'd retired again. Others swore she was consulting at NATO headquarters under an alias. No one really knew. She preferred it that way. But the echo of her teachings lingered wherever she'd passed. Briefing rooms began to open with 5 seconds of silence before orders were read. Soldiers learned to listen, not just to radios, but to the world around them, to each other. And though no one traced it directly back to her, everyone felt the change. One evening, as the sun fell over the desert, Sharma walked to the edge of camp. A convoy was departing, trucks rumbling, dust swirling. At the lead was Captain Rostova, now Major, her vehicle painted with the same call sign Sharma had once used, Wraith. The 2 women met at the gate, wind tugging at their uniforms. "Permission to speak freely, ma'am?" Rostova asked. "Always." Rostova smiled faintly. "When I was a cadet, they told us legends were exaggerations, that no one person could shape an army. I think they were wrong. Sharma shook her head. They were. You can't shape an army. You can only shape one person at a time. Rostova nodded, understanding. Still feels like you shaped more than that. Then I failed at keeping quiet, Sharma said with a dry smile. The engines rumbled to life. Dust rose in waves. Rostova straightened, saluted once more, crisp, perfect. Then she climbed into her vehicle and was gone, swallowed by light and dust. Sharma stood watching until the convoy became a thin line on the horizon. Then she turned back toward the base, her shadow stretching long behind her. That night she wrote her final note in the little black book. You can vanish completely and still leave direction behind. If those who follow learn not to look for you but to look within, then the mission endures. She closed the notebook and set it beside her bed. Outside, the desert wind began to rise, not a storm, just a whisper, carrying the sound of distant engines and the promise of another dawn. And as she closed her eyes, the faintest smile touched her lips. Because she knew now. Her silence was no longer empty. It had become a voice, a way of leading that would outlive her name. Years passed. The mountains stayed the same. War changed names, borders, and uniforms, but the rhythm of it, the fear, the cold, the waiting, that never changed. And in the quiet corners of bases and forward stations, scattered across continents, the name Sharma became less a person and more a story. Some called her the Wraith of Zermer. Others the Ghost General. No one ever agreed on which parts were true. But everyone who'd heard the story carried a fragment of it, a lesson passed down like a code whispered through generations of soldiers. Listen before you lead. Silence is readiness. Strength doesn't shout. No manual listed those phrases. No doctrine cited their origin. But they appeared, handwritten in margins of field guides, etched into locker doors, murmured by instructors to young recruits who'd never seen a battlefield. Like folklore, except this one had a heartbeat. In a classroom of the military academy in Kandya province, a young cadet raised her hand. "Sir," she asked, "is it true there was once a general who took command of a base during a storm and saved a team single-handedly?" The instructor, a weathered colonel with streaks of gray in his hair, paused. He'd been there years ago. He remembered the blizzard, the static, the quiet woman who had walked into chaos and stilled it. But he said none of that. Instead, he leaned on the desk and smiled faintly. "Stories grow," he said, "some faster than truth. But yes, once there was someone who reminded us what leadership sounded like when it whispered instead of shouted." The cadet frowned. What happened to her? "No one knows," the colonel said softly, "and that's how she wanted it." He turned back to the board, writing one word in large, clear strokes. Integrity. She taught us that the moment you need to be seen, you stop serving. The moment you act for recognition, you stop leading. Remember that. He didn't tell them her name. He didn't need to. In a different part of the world, a frozen outpost far north, where the aurora turned the night sky into moving rivers of light, Major Eva Rostova stood on the operations deck, her reflection caught in the glass. Her hair was shorter now, her expression calmer, more weathered. The storm of youth had passed. She commanded a joint task group now, 50 men and women under her authority, and none of them feared her. They trusted her. That was different. That was new. Outside, snow whipped across the runway. A storm was coming, smaller than the one she'd known years ago, but she felt it in her bones all the same. Her second-in-command, Captain Tanaka, older, steadier, came up beside her. "Forecast says we're grounded for 48 hours, he said. Rostova nodded. "Let the teams rest. We'll brief when the weather clears." He studied her quietly. You still think about her?" Rostova didn't answer right away. Her hand drifted to her pocket. Inside, a small metal coin engraved with 4 faint stars. Not official, handmade. A gift Sharma had left her on the morning she departed Paragan. She turned it between her fingers, the edges smooth from years of handling. "Every time the wind changes," she said finally, "it's like she's somewhere out there listening." Tanaka nodded. "You ever try to find her?" "I did," Rostova admitted, "for years, but she was always 2 steps ahead or 1 storm away. After a while I realized she didn't want to be found." "Why?" "Because legends don't live well in daylight," Rostova said quietly. "They fade when you stare too hard." She knew that. The wind outside howled against the glass, the same low, distant moan that once echoed through a mountain gorge. And Rostova smiled faintly. "She's not gone, just part of the weather now." Months later, a convoy arrived from Central Command, bringing with it new recruits, bright, eager faces, still too clean to belong here. Rostova greeted them in the snow, her posture easy but firm. No speeches, no theatrics, just a few words before she dismissed them to orientation. "Before you start thinking you're ready," she said, "remember readiness isn't noise, it's awareness. Learn the silence before the storm. It'll keep you alive." They nodded, not fully understanding. But one day they would. Everyone did, eventually. Elsewhere, far away, in a remote desert outpost few even knew existed, General Anna Sharma stood under a canopy of stars, her hair now entirely silver. The years had slowed her gait, but not her mind. She had no title here, no rank visible on her uniform. Just advisor. It suited her fine. Around her, a small group of local trainees practiced night maneuvers. Their movements were clumsy, uneven. She watched, then called out softly, "Stop listening to yourselves. Listen to the ground, it speaks louder." They froze. Confused, they stared at her. Then one by one, they dropped to a knee, pressing hands to the dirt. The wind carried the faint tremor of approaching vehicles, distant, rhythmic. Enemy patrol. They adjusted positions. And when the lights of the trucks appeared moments later, the trainees were gone, swallowed by darkness unseen. Sharma exhaled through her nose. "Better," she murmured, "now you're learning to hear." A young interpreter beside her whispered, "How did you know they'd come?" She smiled faintly, "Because the wind stopped talking." That night in her tent, she took out the black notebook again. The edges were worn smooth now, the cover almost falling apart. She flipped through its pages, lines of ink fading into smudges, lessons written across decades. On one page, in neat script, were words she'd written long ago. "Command is a privilege borrowed from those who trust you. Return it cleaner than you found it." She traced the line with her finger, then closed the notebook. Outside, the desert wind rose, brushing against the tent like a breath. She could almost hear voices in it, echoes of mountains and snow and laughter that had turned to respect. She thought of Rostova, of Tanaka, of the young soldiers she'd never meet who were still repeating her words without knowing her name. And for the first time in years, she felt something like peace. Days later, a courier arrived, a young officer carrying an encrypted briefcase and a small sealed envelope marked with the insignia of the Joint Command Council. He found her sitting under the awning, tea in hand. "General Sharma?" he asked, uncertain, because her uniform bore no stars. She looked up, eyes soft but sharp. "That's a name from another life. What's in the envelope?" He handed it over, saluting. "Directive from HQ, ma'am. Classified reassignment." She broke the seal. Inside was a single page, typed in plain text. "Effective immediately, General Anna Sharma is reassigned to Strategic Training Command, Eastern Coalition. Role: Doctrine Consultant, retired active status." She read it twice, then folded the paper. "Retired active," she murmured. "That's a contradiction." The courier smiled nervously. "They said you'd understand." She handed the paper back. "Tell them I do." As he left, she watched the horizon, the desert stretching endlessly east. Retirement. The word felt foreign, hollow. You couldn't retire from what you were. You could only stop being needed. And even then, you'd still be listening. Back at the academy, months later, another generation of officers sat through a lecture on crisis command. On the hollow display, a case study appeared. Operation Zermer Ridge, unknown general 20 years prior. The instructor summarized the tactics, the decisions, the outcome. The students listened, riveted. At the end, one cadet raised his hand. "Sir, did this operation really happen? The data's all redacted." The instructor smiled. "It happened, the details don't matter, the lesson does." "What's the lesson, sir?" He looked out over the room, rows of young faces, ambitious, hungry, untested. That sometimes the greatest act of leadership is to remind others how small they are, not to belittle them, but to make them listen again. He turned off the display. The room dimmed. Dismissed. As the cadets gathered their things, he lingered at the podium. When the last one left, he took from his pocket a small black notebook, its cover worn almost smooth. He opened it, scanning the faded handwriting. The first line read, "Why was everyone laughing except her?" He smiled faintly, the same quiet, almost invisible smile of someone remembering something sacred. Then he closed the book and slipped it back into his coat. Somewhere far beyond any map, a figure walked along a ridgeline. The wind howled around her, cold, endless, familiar. A lone silhouette against the snow, moving steady, sure. She carried no stars now. No medals. Just a small black notebook tucked into her jacket, and a memory that refused to fade. And if you listened closely, in the crackle of distant radios, in the pause before an order was given, in the breath soldiers took before they spoke, you could still hear her voice. Not loud. Never loud. Just a whisper carried by wind across the years. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. The desert sun was lower these days. Or maybe she was just noticing it more. General Anna Sharma, retired, at least on paper, walked the perimeter of the small outpost that had become her quiet refuge. The compound was little more than a few prefabs and a flag that barely caught the wind. The kind of place no one visited unless they were lost or looking for something they couldn't name. Her steps were slower now, deliberate, steady. Her shadow stretched long across the sand. Every sunrise felt heavier with memory, but lighter with meaning. She had stopped wearing her insignia years ago. The uniform, stripped of rank, looked cleaner somehow. She told herself she was done leading. But the young ones who rotated through this outpost kept finding her, asking questions that began the same way. "Ma'am, can I ask you something?" And she'd smile, that small, unreadable smile, and listen before she answered. Listening first, always first. That morning, one of the new recruits, Private Layla Noor, barely 20, voice trembling between courage and doubt, approached her during inspection. "Ma'am, how do you know when you're ready to lead?" Sharma paused, eyes tracing the horizon before she spoke. "You're never ready," she said quietly. "But if you're still asking that question, you're closer than most." Layla frowned. "Then how did you know?" "I didn't," Sharma replied. "I just stopped waiting for permission." She watched the girl nod slowly, trying to absorb the weight of that. Later, when the recruit walked away, Sharma whispered to herself, "And I've been carrying it ever since." Inside her quarters, the heat hung heavy. The air smelled faintly of oil and paper. On her desk lay the black notebook, still there, edges frayed, its spine now held together by tape. Beside it, a small radio hummed with static, cycling through distant channels. She rarely turned it off. The noise made her feel connected, like the world was still speaking somewhere, even if faintly. She opened the notebook to a page written decades ago, back when her hand was steadier. Leadership is the art of disappearing once your work is done. She traced it with her thumb. It was strange to read your own advice and still be learning from it. The radio crackled again, faint voices, coordinates, laughter, then silence. She leaned back, closing her eyes. The sound reminded her of everything and nothing. Mountains, snow, Rostova's laugh echoing off steel walls, the smell of diesel mixed with fear. The quiet after victory, the only time silence felt heavy. Later that day, a supply convoy arrived from Central Command. Among the boxes and fuel drums was a single package addressed to A. Sharma, Ret. The quartermaster carried it in, curious. "Ma'am, this came with the official seal," he said. "No sender." She nodded, motioning for him to set it on the desk. After he left, she studied the package. Wrapped in standard brown paper, tied with simple cord. She unwrapped it carefully, like something sacred. Inside was a slim, leather-bound folder. She opened it and froze. The first page bore the emblem of the Defense Council. Below it a line of text. "By unanimous decree, the Council hereby recognizes General Anna Sharma as the founding instructor of the Silent Command Doctrine." Her eyes softened. She turned the page. Inside were excerpts from training manuals, her phrases, her principles, rewritten into regulation text. Every sentence she'd once spoken in field briefings, in mess halls, in storms, now printed, codified, official. She let out a quiet laugh, half wonder, half sorrow. "They turned silence into curriculum," she whispered. Near the back was a short note, handwritten on official stationery. "Ma'am, you don't know me, but your doctrine saved my platoon during the Cura ambush last spring. I wasn't even born when you commanded Paragan, but every decision I made that night came from something you wrote. We never met, but I owe you my life and the lives of 30 men and women who trusted me when I told them to wait before acting. You taught us patience through stories. Thank you." Major Eva Rostova, commanding officer, 3rd Tactical Unit. Sharma's hand trembled slightly as she read the signature. "Eva, Major now." She closed her eyes, exhaling slowly. "You made it," she murmured. "You carried it forward." That night the outpost fell into deep silence. Stars spilled across the desert sky, thousands of them, cold and bright. Sharma sat outside with her tea, the file open beside her. The young interpreter, Rehin, stepped out of the mess tent, spotting her. "General, you're still awake." "Old habits," she said. "The stars don't sleep. Why should I?" He smiled awkwardly. "Permission to join you." She nodded. They sat in silence for a while. The only sound was the whisper of sand moving across stone. "Can I ask you something?" he said finally. "You already have," she replied, smiling faintly. He hesitated. "Were you ever afraid?" "Every time," she said. "The trick isn't to hide it, it's to let fear sharpen you, not freeze you." He nodded thoughtfully. "And when you stopped being afraid?" She looked up at the stars. "That's when I knew I was tired." The boy was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "My mother says courage is born from anger." Sharma chuckled softly. "Your mother's half right. Courage is born from love, but anger helps it walk faster." They both laughed, the sound small and human in the vast night. After he left, Sharma stared at the horizon again, a pale shimmer of moonlight stretching across the dunes. And she whispered into the wind, "Still here, Eva, still listening." Weeks turned into months. Then one morning, the radio went quiet. No static, no voice, just a low hum, then nothing. The world outside her tent was still, the kind of stillness that feels deliberate, as if the planet had paused to listen. She turned off the radio, folded the black notebook, and placed it on the desk beside her teacup. Her hands lingered there, one final moment of stillness. Then she stood, walked outside and faced the horizon. The wind rose, carrying fine dust in gentle spirals. It wrapped around her, whispering like an old friend. She smiled, not the proud smile of victory, but the quiet one that belongs to those who have finally understood something too big for words. Far away, weeks later, a drone operator reviewing desert footage paused the playback. On the screen, a lone figure walking along a ridgeline, hair silver, stride steady. Then the feed cut out, interference, sandstorm, something unseen. When the footage resumed, the figure was gone. They tried to trace her. They found the outpost empty, dust covering everything. Only one thing remained untouched, a black notebook resting on the desk, open to the final page. It read, "If they ever ask who taught you, tell them it was the wind." Years later, at a leadership symposium in the capital, Major General Eva Rostova stood at a podium before hundreds of officers. Behind her on the projection screen were the words, "The Sharma principle, listening as command." Her voice was calm, measured, deliberate. "She was never interested in fame," Rostova said. "She didn't want to be remembered, but we remember her not because she wanted it, because she deserved it." The audience was silent, waiting. Rostova looked down briefly, then back up. "When I was young, I mocked her," she said, "because I mistook silence for weakness. But she showed me that silence can lead armies, save lives, and build legacies. She didn't just teach us how to fight. She taught us how to be human while fighting." Her voice faltered for a moment, then steadied. "And when she was gone, she didn't leave monuments. She left behavior, and that's harder to destroy." The crowd rose in applause, slow, reverent, heavy with meaning. But Rostova didn't smile. She simply closed her eyes for a moment, whispering to herself, "You were right, ma'am, strength is quiet." That night, long after the ceremony, Rostova walked to the academy's memorial wall, a black slab of stone engraved with names of fallen soldiers. There was no name for Sharma, no official record, no grave. But near the bottom corner, etched faintly into the metal by an unknown hand, were 4 words. "She listened, we lived." Rostova touched the engraving, her breath catching. The wind stirred around her, cool and soft, brushing her hair back like a gentle hand. For a second, she swore she heard that familiar voice again, low, steady, patient. "You led well." Tears pricked her eyes, but she smiled through them. "Thank you, General," she whispered. The wind carried her words upward, scattering them across the night sky like dust over a long-forgotten battlefield. The stars above burned bright, endless, silent, as if the whole universe had paused just to honor one quiet woman who had taught the world that leadership didn't need noise, power, or applause. Just conviction, and the strength to walk through storms without demanding to be seen. Morning broke over the academy parade grounds, sunlight spilling across neat rows of uniforms, flags stirring in the soft breeze. It was graduation day. Hundreds of cadets stood at attention, faces young, eyes fierce. They had never known her. None of them had even been alive when General Anna Sharma walked the ridges of Paragan. But every one of them had studied her doctrine, unknowingly reciting her words as part of their oath. From the reviewing stand, Major General Eva Rostova watched them with quiet pride. Time had carved its marks into her, streaks of gray, deeper lines near her eyes, but her gaze still carried the same calm authority Sharma had once shown her. As the anthem faded, the commandant stepped forward, giving the signal. Each cadet reached for the insignia pinned to their chest, the silver crest of command, and raised it toward the sun before fastening it on. The gesture wasn't standard protocol. It wasn't even official. But it had become tradition. Unwritten. a silent tribute that every class performed without knowing why. Rostova turned slightly, speaking to the officer beside her. "Do they know where that comes from?" He shook his head. "No, ma'am, just that it's always been done." She smiled faintly. "Then it's working." Later, after the ceremony, she walked alone through the empty halls of the academy. Halls lined with portraits of generals and admirals, their faces carved in oil and history. But one wall remained blank. It had been left that way intentionally, decades ago, for those who served without asking to be remembered. Rostova stopped before it, her reflection faint on the polished surface. In her hand she held a small, weathered notebook, its pages yellowed, the ink fading. Sharma's notebook. It had been found in the desert outpost after her disappearance. Rostova had kept it safe all these years, opening it only on nights when silence felt too loud. She turned to the first page. The handwriting was tight, deliberate. The first words read, "Why was everyone laughing except her?" She let the question sit there, hanging between them like a ghost. Then she whispered, because she already knew how it would end. Years ago, that question had marked the beginning of a story, one that started in mockery and ended in reverence. Now it was the heartbeat of a doctrine, a moral woven into the bones of armies across continents. But to her, to Rostova, it was still personal. She remembered that first day. The laughter, the arrogance, the silence that followed when Sharma put on the general's uniform. It hadn't just silenced them, it had changed them. Not through fear, through realization. That the quiet ones aren't weak. They're just carrying storms you can't see yet. Rostova closed the notebook and stepped outside. The courtyard was empty now, golden light reflecting off the memorial wall in the distance. She walked toward it, slow, deliberate steps, the way Sharma used to walk through the hangars at Paragan. At the base of the wall, someone had placed a small metal plaque in recent years. It read, "The Silent Doctrine, Origin Unknown." She knelt before it, brushing dust from the inscription. "Not unknown," she murmured, "just humble." A soft wind passed through the courtyard, warm, carrying the scent of rain from the east. And for a fleeting second, she thought she heard her old mentor's voice again. Not a whisper this time, more like a breath inside her thoughts. "Good, you kept them listening." That evening, Rostova stood before the new officers gathered in the hall. The lights dimmed, and the projector flickered to life, showing images of unnamed soldiers in frozen landscapes, burning deserts, stormy ridges. No labels, no credits. She spoke quietly, her voice low and deliberate, the way Sharma once did. "You'll be told leadership is about decisiveness. That courage means acting without doubt. That victory is measured in territory or survival." She paused, letting the silence settle. But those are half-truths. Real leadership isn't about action. It's about perception, about knowing when not to speak, about listening to the wind before it changes. She stepped forward, hands clasped behind her back. In every generation, there are those who lead loudly and those who lead deeply. The loud ones are remembered in parades. The deep ones are remembered in silence. Her gaze swept over the crowd, faces young and earnest, waiting for a moral. "When you wear that uniform," she said softly, "remember this. Every command you give carries an echo. And one day, that echo will define you." She let the words linger, not as instruction but as inheritance. When the lights came back on, the audience remained silent. Not out of confusion, out of respect. Because for a brief moment, they felt it, that same stillness Sharma once commanded in the middle of chaos. A pause heavy with purpose. Rostova looked out over them, her chest tightening with something that wasn't sadness, wasn't pride, just completion. Then she turned, walked off stage and into the quiet corridors beyond. Outside, night had fallen. A light rain began to fall, rare, soft, clean. She walked to her car, her reflection blurred on the wet pavement. In the distance, lightning flickered across the sky. For a heartbeat, it illuminated the horizon, and in that flash of white, she thought she saw a figure standing near the tree line. Tall still, hair silver, uniform plain. Watching. Rostova froze, her breath caught. She blinked once, and the figure was gone. But the feeling remained. That warmth in her chest. That calm. That knowing. She smiled, whispering, "Still watching the wind, aren't you?" The rain answered, pattering softly against the hood of her coat. And she knew, without needing proof, Sharma had never left. She had just become part of the air itself. Years later, long after Rostova, after the last of Sharma's contemporaries had passed, the silent doctrine became standard curriculum. New generations memorized it, without realizing they were reciting her life. Listen before you lead. Command without noise. Strength is quiet. They repeated those words before deployment, wrote them on barracks walls, printed them on the inside covers of field manuals. They didn't know whose words they were. They just knew they worked. And maybe that was the most fitting legacy of all, to be remembered without name, only through principle. One winter, a group of cadets from the academy made a training expedition into the mountains once called Paragan. They came across a ridge where the snow never melted. There, half buried in ice, they found a fragment of old metal, the corner of a nameplate, edges worn smooth. Only one word remained legible, SHAR. They took it back to base and placed it in the museum's unidentified relics wing. No one connected it to the doctrine they studied every day. But one of the curators, an older woman, stopped and stared at it for a long time before whispering under her breath. She finally rested. And so the story became something more than history. It became atmosphere, a quiet presence that moved unseen through generations. No medals, no statues, just the whisper that started it all. A woman mocked in a locker room, a uniform that silenced laughter, a life that turned humility into a weapon stronger than fear. Sometimes, in moments of chaos, when commanders stand on the edge of decisions that might break them, the wind changes direction, and a strange calm settles. And if they listen closely, really listen, they hear her voice, steady, calm, guiding. You know what to do, you always did. No sound follows it. No echo. Just silence. The same silence she once taught an army to trust. So remember her, not as the general who wore the stars, but as the soldier who never needed them. The one who believed that power wasn't proven by command, but by restraint. That dignity doesn't shout. That humility isn't surrender. That silence, when chosen with courage, can move nations. And long after the last page of her story faded, one truth remained, the kind she would have smiled at quietly and walked away from without a word. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.